The Grand Meridian Hotel stood like a monument to luxury in the heart of downtown, its Art Deco facade glowing against the night sky, as Marcus Chen straightened his burgundy vest for what felt like the 100th time that evening. The gold name tag pinned to his chest read, Marcus Chen, Guest Services in elegant script, though most guests barely glanced at it as they swept past the marble reception desk where he'd been stationed for the past 6 hours. It was nearly 11 p.m. on a Thursday, that dead zone between the dinner crowd heading out and the late-night revelers stumbling back in, and Marcus found himself fighting the familiar weight of exhaustion that came with working the evening shift while taking business classes during the day. He'd been at the Grand Meridian for 3 years now, starting as a luggage porter right after dropping out of college when his mother got sick, and he'd worked his way up to the guest services desk through sheer determination and the kind of attention to detail that made guests feel like they were the only people in the world who mattered. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was steady, and the health insurance had been a lifeline when his mother needed her treatments, though she'd passed away 8 months ago and left him with medical bills that would take years to clear. Tonight the lobby was unusually quiet, with only a handful of guests scattered across the plush seating areas, some working on laptops while others nursed cocktails from the bar, and Marcus used the lull to review the next day's checkout list and make notes about which guests might need taxi arrangements or restaurant recommendations. The chandeliers overhead cast warm pools of light across the polished marble floors, and the faint sound of piano music drifted from the lounge where a jazz trio played to a sparse audience, creating an atmosphere of understated elegance that Marcus had long ago stopped noticing, except in moments like these when the quiet allowed him to really see his surroundings. He was just reaching for his coffee cup, now cold and bitter from sitting too long, when he noticed an elderly man shuffling across the lobby with uncertain steps, his expensive suit rumpled and his silver hair slightly disheveled in a way that immediately triggered Marcus's professional instincts that something was wrong. The man couldn't have been younger than 70, with the kind of distinguished features that spoke of a lifetime of authority and success, but his eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses held a confusion that Marcus recognized from his mother's bad days near the end, that lost quality that came from not quite understanding where you were or how you'd gotten there. The elderly man clutched a crumpled city map in one hand and a leather briefcase in the other, and he kept turning in slow circles as if trying to orient himself, his polished shoes squeaking slightly on the marble as he rotated, and Marcus noticed that several other staff members had seen the man but were deliberately looking away because it was the end of their shifts and no one wanted to deal with a potentially complicated situation. Something in Marcus wouldn't let him turn away, maybe because the man reminded him of his mother's oncologist who'd been so kind during those final months, or maybe just because this was a human being who clearly needed help, and Marcus had been raised to believe that you didn't walk past people in distress no matter how tired you were or how many problems of your own you had weighing on your shoulders. He came around from behind the desk and approached the elderly man with a gentle smile, moving slowly so as not to startle him, and as he got closer he noticed the man's hands were trembling slightly and there was a small cut on his forehead that looked recent, as if he'd bumped into something or perhaps even fallen. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said in his practiced professional tone that managed to be both respectful and warm. "Are you all right? Can I help you find something?" The elderly man turned to face him, and for a moment his eyes seemed to struggle to focus. That distant look that Marcus remembered too well from hospital waiting rooms, before something clicked and a relieved smile spread across his weathered face. "I seem to have gotten turned around," the man said, his voice carrying the refined accent of someone educated at expensive schools, though there was an embarrassed tremor underneath the word. "I was trying to get back to my hotel, but I'm not entirely certain which hotel it is," which I realize must sound absolutely mad. Marcus glanced down at the crumpled map in the man's hands, and noticed it was from a tourist information center, already several years out of date, based on the businesses marked, and when he looked at the man's briefcase he saw a luggage tag that read W. Harrison but no hotel name. "That's no problem at all, sir," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "Let's figure this out together. Do you remember anything about your hotel? What color was the lobby, or did it have any distinctive features?" The elderly man, Mr. Harrison, furrowed his brow in concentration, one hand coming up to touch the cut on his forehead absently, and Marcus noticed the expensive watch on his wrist, and the quality of his suit despite its current disheveled state, details that suggested this wasn't some homeless person wandering in off the streets, but someone who belonged in exactly this kind of upscale establishment. There were columns, Mr. Harrison said slowly, his eyes distant as he tried to summon the memory. Large white columns in the entrance and the carpet was red, a deep red like wine. Marcus ran through his mental catalogue of hotels in the downtown area, a knowledge base he'd built up over 3 years of helping guests navigate the city, and immediately several possibilities came to mind, but none of them were close by, and Mr. Harrison looked exhausted and unsteady on his feet. "I think I know which hotel you might mean," Marcus said, "but it's about 15 blocks from here. Would you like to sit down for a moment while I make some calls to verify?" He gestured toward one of the leather armchairs near the reception desk, but Mr. Harrison was already shaking his head, that stubborn pride that elderly people sometimes clung to when they felt their independence slipping away. "I don't want to be a bother," Mr. Harrison insisted, though his legs were visibly trembling now. "If you could just point me in the right direction, I'm sure I can manage." Marcus knew that was absolutely not true, knew it in his bones from watching his mother insist she could walk to the bathroom by herself and then collapse halfway there, and he made a decision that probably violated some company policy about not leaving the desk unattended during a shift. "Sir, I'm going to be honest with you," Marcus said, lowering his voice so the conversation felt private despite the open lobby. "You have a cut on your head and you seem a bit disoriented, which makes me worried you might have hit your head earlier. I'd really like to help make sure you get back safely, and I'd feel terrible if I just pointed you in a direction and you got more lost or hurt. Would you let me help you?" There was a long moment where Mr. Harrison studied Marcus's face, really looked at him in a way that felt searching and intense, as if he were measuring something beyond the burgundy vest and professional smile, and then something in the elderly man's shoulders relaxed, and he nodded slowly. Marcus guided Mr. Harrison to one of the leather armchairs and helped him settle into it, noticing how the elderly man seemed to sink into the cushions with relief, his briefcase clutched against his chest, like a security blanket. Up close, Marcus could see that the cut on his forehead was superficial but definitely fresh, maybe an hour or two old based on how the blood had dried, and he wondered what had happened to this distinguished-looking man to leave him wandering the streets alone and confused. "Let me get you some water," Marcus said, and before Mr. Harrison could protest, he was already heading to the small service station behind the reception desk where they kept bottles for guests, grabbing one and returning quickly because he didn't want to leave the elderly man alone for long. Mr. Harrison accepted the water with a grateful nod and took a small sip, his hands steadier now that he was sitting down, and Marcus pulled over a nearby ottoman so he could sit at eye level rather than looming over him. "I'm Marcus," he said, deciding that formality could take a back seat to making a human connection. "I'm going to make a few quick calls to find your hotel, and then we'll get you back there safely. While I do that, can you tell me if you remember how you got that cut on your head?" Mr. Harrison touched his forehead again, seeming surprised to find the injury there as if he'd forgotten about it, and his expression grew troubled as he tried to recall. "I think I fell," he said slowly, the words coming with obvious effort. "I was crossing a street and the curb was higher than I expected, or perhaps I misjudged the distance. Everything's been a bit fuzzy since then." Marcus felt a cold spike of concern because a head injury combined with confusion in an elderly person could indicate something serious, maybe a concussion or worse, and he knew that getting Mr. Harrison medical attention might be more important than finding his hotel. "Have you been feeling dizzy or nauseous?" he asked, slipping into the careful questioning he'd learned from countless hospital visits with his mother. "Any trouble with your vision or headaches?" Mr. Harrison considered this, his brow furrowing in concentration, and Marcus could see the intelligence behind the confusion, a sharp mind struggling against whatever fog had descended on it. "A bit of a headache, yes, but I often get those when I'm tired. The dizziness comes and goes. I feel quite foolish, actually. I'm usually very good with directions." Marcus stood and moved back to the reception desk, keeping Mr. Harrison in his line of sight while he pulled out his phone and started searching for hotel information, his fingers flying across the screen as he looked up properties with white columns and red carpets in the downtown area. The Ambassador Hotel fit the description perfectly, and it was known for catering to business travelers and wealthy tourists, exactly the kind of place someone like Mr. Harrison would stay. But when Marcus called their front desk and described their guest, the night manager said they had no one by that name checked in. He tried 3 more hotels with similar descriptions, each call coming up empty, and he could see Mr. Harrison starting to grow agitated in his chair, that helpless frustration building as the realization that he was truly lost began to sink in. "I should remember," Mr. Harrison said, his voice rising slightly with distress. "I should know where I'm staying. This is ridiculous." Marcus abandoned the phone calls and returned to Mr. Harrison's side, crouching down again so he was at the elderly man's eye level, and he spoke in the calm, steady voice he'd used with his mother during her moments of confusion and fear. "It's okay," he said firmly. "We're going to figure this out, but I need you to trust me for a moment. I think it might be a good idea to have a doctor take a quick look at that cut on your head, just to make sure everything's all right. The hospital is only a few blocks away and I can take you there myself." Mr. Harrison's face paled at the suggestion, and he shook his head adamantly, that pride surging back up. "No hospitals," he said. "I detest hospitals and I'm perfectly fine, just a bit confused about hotels. If I could just look at my phone, I'm sure I have the information." He patted his pockets with increasing franticness, searching for a device that clearly wasn't there, and Marcus watched as the realization hit that the phone was missing too, probably dropped during the fall or left behind somewhere in Mr. Harrison's wandering. "All right, no hospital right now," Marcus agreed, making a mental note to revisit that conversation if things got worse. "But let's try something else. Do you have any cards or papers in your briefcase that might have your hotel information?" Mr. Harrison looked down at the leather briefcase as if seeing it for the first time, then carefully opened it with trembling fingers, revealing a neatly organized interior with file folders, a tablet in a protective case, and several business cards held together with a rubber band. Marcus helped him pull out the contents, being careful not to disturb the organization too much, and as they sorted through papers and cards, a picture began to emerge of exactly who Mr. Harrison was. The business cards identified him as William Harrison, Chief Executive Officer of Harrison Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate that Marcus vaguely recognized from business news articles, and there were papers related to a board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at the Belmont Conference Center. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized this wasn't just some lost tourist, but a powerful business executive who was supposed to be at a crucial meeting in less than 10 hours, and someone somewhere was probably looking for him or would be soon. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus said carefully, "is there someone I can call for you? A colleague or family member who might know where you're staying?" The elderly man's face went through a series of emotions, confusion giving way to frustration and then something that looked like shame, and when he spoke his voice was quiet and defeated. "My assistant usually handles all the arrangements," he said. "Catherine would know, but I don't remember her number and it's in my phone, which I seem to have lost. My wife died 3 years ago and my children, well, we're not particularly close." Marcus pulled out his own phone and quickly searched for Harrison Industries' main number, but when he called he got only an automated directory and no emergency contact option, which wasn't surprising given that it was nearly midnight. He considered calling the police to report a lost person, but something about that felt like it would embarrass Mr. Harrison further, strip away another layer of dignity from a man who was clearly struggling to maintain what little control he still had over the situation. "I have an idea," Marcus said, making another decision that was probably going to get him in trouble with his supervisor. "The Grand Meridian has guest rooms, obviously, and I think the best thing would be for you to stay here tonight where it's safe and comfortable, and then in the morning when people are in their offices, we can track down your assistant and get everything sorted out. We can also have our hotel doctor take a quick look at your head, just to be safe." Mr. Harrison started to protest, probably about to mention the cost or insist he didn't want charity, but Marcus held up a hand. "Consider it customer service," he said with a smile. "You're clearly a guest at some hotel in this city, and right now you need help, so let us help. We can sort out the billing details tomorrow." What Marcus didn't mention was that he had absolutely no authority to offer anyone a free room, and that doing so would probably cost him his job if management found out, but he couldn't bring himself to care about that in the moment, because sitting in front of him was a vulnerable human being who needed help, and Marcus had the power to provide it. Mr. Harrison studied Marcus's face again with that intense searching look, and then slowly nodded his acceptance. "You're very kind," he said simply, and there was something in his eyes that suggested he understood exactly what Marcus was risking. Marcus returned to the reception desk and pulled up the room availability system on the computer, his heart hammering as he scrolled through the options and tried to figure out how to make this work without immediately alerting his supervisor to what he was doing. The Grand Meridian had 43 rooms available tonight out of 200 total, a decent occupancy rate for a Thursday in the off-season, and he found a standard room on the 8th floor that was clean and ready but hadn't been assigned yet. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered the best way to process this, knowing that every room assignment generated an automatic billing record and that his employee ID would be attached to whatever he did next, creating a paper trail that would lead straight back to him when someone inevitably audited the night's transactions. He could put the room under a fake name and mark it as complimentary for a VIP, but that would require a manager's override code that he didn't have, or he could process it as a regular booking and hope that Mr. Harrison's real hotel would cover the cost once they located it tomorrow, though that felt dishonest and might still cost the elderly man money he hadn't planned to spend. In the end, Marcus made a decision that was probably the stupidest thing he'd ever done in his professional career, but felt like the only morally acceptable option available. He processed the room as a guest services accommodation under his own employee account, which meant that if the charges weren't cleared or reimbursed, they would come directly out of his next paycheck. The standard room rate at the Grand Meridian was $340 per night before taxes, which represented almost a full week's worth of groceries for Marcus, or 2 months of minimum payments on his mother's medical bills. But as he hit the enter key to confirm the booking, he found he could live with that consequence, because the alternative was sending a confused elderly man with a head injury back out onto the streets alone. The system generated a key card and Marcus grabbed it along with a guest welcome packet, then returned to where Mr. Harrison sat waiting with his briefcase, looking small and tired in the large leather chair. "All set," Marcus said, keeping his voice cheerful and professional. "I've got you in room 814, which has a nice view of the city and should be very comfortable. Let me take you up and make sure you have everything you need." Mr. Harrison stood slowly, accepting Marcus's offered arm for support, and together they made their way to the elevator bank while Marcus used his radio to quickly inform the night manager that he was stepping away from the desk for a few minutes to help a guest with special needs, which was technically true even if it omitted several crucial details. The elevator ride was quiet except for the soft jazz music piped through hidden speakers, and Marcus noticed that Mr. Harrison kept glancing at him with that same searching expression, as if trying to understand what motivated this young hotel worker to go so far out of his way for a complete stranger. When they reached the 8th floor, Marcus guided Mr. Harrison down the plushly carpeted hallway to room 814 and used the keycard to open the door, revealing a tastefully decorated space with a king-size bed, a sitting area with a flat-screen television, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering cityscape. "The bathroom is right through there," Marcus said, moving through the room and turning on lights while Mr. Harrison stood in the doorway looking overwhelmed. "There's a coffee maker, mini fridge with complimentary water and soft drinks, and you can order room service anytime by pressing 9 on the phone. I'm going to send up our on-call doctor to check on that cut, and I'll also have the kitchen prepare some food in case you're hungry." Mr. Harrison finally moved into the room and set his briefcase down carefully on the luggage rack, then turned to face Marcus with an expression that combined gratitude, confusion, and something else Marcus couldn't quite identify. "I don't understand why you're doing this," the elderly man said quietly. "You don't know me, and I've been nothing but a burden on what's probably already been a long shift for you. Most people would have just called me a taxi and sent me on my way." Marcus thought about his mother, about all the nights she'd been confused and scared in hospital rooms while nurses and doctors moved around her with clinical efficiency, treating her like a problem to be solved rather than a person deserving of dignity and compassion. He thought about the few medical professionals who'd been different, who'd taken the time to hold her hand and explain things patiently even when they were busy, and how much those small acts of kindness had meant during the darkest period of his life. "My mother was sick for a long time before she passed away," Marcus said, surprised to hear himself sharing something so personal with a stranger. "I learned that kindness doesn't cost anything, but it can mean everything to someone who's scared and alone. You're someone's father, someone's friend, someone who matters, and you need help right now. That's all the reason I need." Mr. Harrison's eyes glistened behind his wire-rimmed glasses and he nodded slowly, seeming to understand that this was about more than just hotel service or professional duty. "Your mother raised a good man," he said simply. "She must have been very proud of you." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected, bringing up the familiar ache of loss that still caught him off guard sometimes, and he had to clear his throat before responding. I hope so, he managed. Now let me make those calls and get you sorted out. Is there anything else you need right away? Extra pillows, different temperature for the room. Mr. Harrison shook his head and moved to sit on the edge of the bed, and Marcus could see exhaustion washing over the elderly man now that he was finally in a safe space. This is more than enough, Mr. Harrison said. Thank you, Marcus. Truly. Marcus left the room and immediately got on his radio to contact the hotel's on-call physician, Reeves, who lived in the building and was available for guest emergencies 24 hours a day, explaining the situation in brief clinical terms that emphasized the head injury and confusion without making Mr. Harrison sound incapable or pathetic. Reeves agreed to come up immediately, and Marcus then called down to the kitchen to request a light meal of soup, bread, and tea be sent up to room 814, charging it to the same guest services account that was already taking a beating from the room rent. As he rode the elevator back down to the lobby, Marcus felt a strange mixture of anxiety and satisfaction, knowing he'd probably crossed several lines and created problems for himself that wouldn't be easily resolved, but also knowing with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. When he returned to the reception desk, his supervisor Diane was standing there with her arms crossed and an expression that suggested she'd been reviewing the computer records while he was gone. Diane was a woman in her 50s who'd worked in hospitality for 3 decades and had seen every scam, every rule violation, and every well-intentioned mistake that hotel employees could make, and she had a reputation for being fair but absolutely unwilling to bend the rules even slightly. Marcus, she said in a tone that made his stomach sink, we need to talk about the room you just checked in under your employee account. Marcus took a deep breath and prepared to either save his job or lose. Marcus stood behind the reception desk facing Diane, his supervisor, and tried to organize his thoughts into something that would sound reasonable, rather than like the impulsive decision of someone who'd let emotions override professional judgment. Diane wasn't looking angry exactly, more curious and concerned in the way of someone who'd seen young employees make career-ending mistakes before and wanted to understand what they'd been thinking. I can explain, Marcus started, then stopped because those 3 words had probably preceded every bad explanation in the history of workplace conversations. There was an elderly man who came in confused and lost, with a head injury, and all the other staff were looking away because it was the end of their shifts, and I couldn't just ignore someone who needed help. Diane held up one hand to stop him, then gestured for him to follow her to the small office behind the reception area where they could talk without being overheard by guests, and Marcus's anxiety ratcheted up another notch because being taken to the office for a conversation was never a good sign. Once the door closed behind them, Diane sat down at her desk and pulled up the booking record on her computer, studying it with the practiced eye of someone who could read an entire situation from a few lines of transaction data. William Harrison, checked into room 814 at 11:42 p.m., charged to your employee account as a guest services accommodation, she read aloud. No credit card on file, no advance booking, no confirmation number from his actual hotel. Marcus, you've been here long enough to know that what you did violates about 6 different company policies, not to mention potentially exposing yourself to significant financial liability if we can't resolve the billing situation. Marcus nodded, accepting the rebuke because everything she said was true and he didn't try to make excuses or deflect blame because that would only make things worse. I know, he said quietly, but he was really confused and hurt, and I think he might have been having some kind of medical episode, maybe from hitting his head. I sent Dr. Reeves up to check on him, and I'm planning to track down his assistant first thing in the morning to get everything sorted out. He's the CEO of Harrison Industries, so it's not like he can't afford to pay. He just temporarily couldn't remember where he was staying or access any of his usual resources. Diane leaned back in her chair and studied Marcus with an expression that was hard to read, and the silence stretched out uncomfortably while Marcus waited for the inevitable consequences of his actions. He thought about the rent due in 2 weeks, about the medical bills that were already crushing him, about how hard it had been to find this job in the first place and how much harder it would be to find another one if he got fired for cause. But even with all that running through his mind, he still couldn't bring himself to regret helping Mr. Harrison. You're aware that if we can't track down his real hotel or get reimbursement from his company, that $340 plus tax is coming out of your paycheck. Diane said finally, that's not a threat. That's just the reality of how you processed this booking. Are you prepared to eat that cost? Marcus swallowed hard but nodded. Yes, if it comes to that, I'll pay. I know it was stupid from a financial perspective, but it was the right thing to do from a human perspective, and I guess I decided that being a good person was more important than being a good employee. Something shifted in Diane's expression, a softening around her eyes that suggested his answer had meant something to her, and she sighed deeply before speaking again. 3 years ago, my father had a stroke while he was traveling for business in Chicago, she said, her voice quieter now and more personal. He was found wandering around his hotel floor in his pajamas at 2 in the morning, completely confused about where he was or why he was there. The night manager at that hotel didn't just call security and have him removed. She personally sat with him until the ambulance arrived, then followed up with my family to make sure we had all the information we needed about his condition. That woman probably violated a dozen policies too, but because of her my father got help before anything worse happened, and our family will never forget that kindness. Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as he realized where this conversation was going, but he stayed quiet and let Diane finish. So I'm not going to fire you for having a conscience, she continued, but I am going to help you fix this mess you've created, because doing the right thing shouldn't cost you a week's worth of pay. First thing tomorrow morning, you and I are going to work together to contact Harrison Industries and get this resolved properly. If they won't cover it, I'll process the room as a management comp and eat the hit on my departmental budget, because this hotel can afford $300 a hell of a lot easier than you can. Relief flooded through Marcus so intensely that he actually felt lightheaded, and he had to blink rapidly to keep unexpected tears from forming. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I really appreciate that, Diane. She waved off his gratitude with a dismissive gesture. Don't thank me yet. We still have to make this right. Now tell me everything about this Mr. Harrison situation so we can figure out the best approach for tomorrow. Marcus spent the next 15 minutes recounting the entire encounter in detail, from first spotting Mr. Harrison wandering confused in the lobby to helping him get settled in the room and calling Dr. Reeves to examine him, and Diane took notes while asking occasional clarifying questions that showed her decades of hospitality experience. When he finished, she sat back and tapped her pen against her notepad thoughtfully. Here's what we're going to do, she said. First, we wait for Dr. Reeves to finish his examination and get his assessment of Mr. Harrison's condition. If there's any indication of serious medical issues, we'll need to involve the hospital regardless of what Mr. Harrison wants. Second, tomorrow morning I want you to start calling around to other hotels systematically, not just the obvious ones but also boutique places and extended stay properties, because a CEO might have preferences we wouldn't automatically think of. Third, we search for any press coverage about Harrison Industries that might mention where their executives typically stay when they're in town for business. And fourth, we prepare a detailed incident report documenting everything that happened tonight, because if there are any legal or insurance issues down the line, we want a clear record that shows we acted in good faith to help someone in distress. Marcus nodded, mentally organizing the tasks and already thinking about how to execute them efficiently. Should I call the police to report him as a missing person, he asked, in case someone from his hotel or company has filed a report. Diane considered this, then shook her head. Not yet, because that might trigger a response that embarrasses him or creates publicity he doesn't want. Remember, this is a CEO who's going to have board meetings and business deals depending on people's perception of his competence and judgment. If we can resolve this quietly and let him maintain his dignity, that's going to be better for everyone involved. It was a good point, and Marcus felt grateful once again for Diane's experience and wisdom in navigating these delicate situations. They were interrupted by Marcus's radio crackling to life with Dr. Reeves's voice requesting to speak with him, and Diane gestured for him to take the call while she continued making notes. Dr. Reeves, this is Marcus. Go ahead, he said into the radio. The doctor's voice came through clearly, professional but with an undertone of concern. Marcus, I've completed my examination of Mr. Harrison in room 84. He has a superficial laceration on his forehead that I've cleaned and bandaged. No stitches required, but I'm concerned about some of his cognitive symptoms. He's displaying signs of mild delirium that could be from a concussion, or could potentially indicate a more serious condition like a transient ischemic attack or early-stage dementia. I've recommended that he go to the emergency room for a CT scan and full neurological workup, but he's refused. I can't force him to go, but I wanted you to be aware of the situation. Marcus exchanged a worried glance with Diane, who'd been able to hear the doctor's report through the radio, and they both understood the implications of what Dr. Reeves was saying. Is he in immediate danger? Marcus asked. Like if he stays in the room tonight with monitoring, is that acceptable or do we need to call an ambulance? There was a pause while Dr. Reeves considered the question.
with regular check-ins throughout the night to make sure his condition doesn't deteriorate. I think it's acceptable for him to stay, but someone needs to look in on him every 2 hours minimum. If he shows any signs of worsening confusion, loss of consciousness, seizures, or severe headache, emergency services need to be called immediately. Diane was already nodding and reaching for a schedule sheet. I'll arrange the welfare checks, she said quietly to Mark. You focus on your regular duties, and I'll coordinate with the overnight housekeeping supervisor to have someone check on him at the required interval.
The rest of Marcus's shift passed in a blur of normal tasks mixed with constant worry about Mr. Harrison upstairs in room 814, and every time his radio crackled with an update from whoever was doing the current welfare check, his heart would jump into his throat, until he heard that everything was stable. Diane had indeed coordinated with Maria, the overnight housekeeping supervisor, to have someone knock on Mr. Harrison's door every 2 hours and verify that he was responsive and coherent, and so far all the reports had been positive, the elderly man answering the door looking tired but lucid, and thanking them for their concern before going back to bed. Marcus finished his shift at 2 a.m. and normally would have headed straight home to his small apartment across town, but tonight he found himself lingering in the employee break room, nursing a cup of coffee and checking his phone obsessively for any messages about Mr. Harrison, even though he'd given strict instructions to be called if anything changed. The break room was a windowless space with fluorescent lighting and mismatched furniture donated from guest rooms that had been renovated. Not particularly comfortable but functional enough for staff to eat meals and decompress between the demands of customer service. Janet from the night audit team was also there, working on her laptop and occasionally glancing up at Marcus with curiosity, because the story of his unauthorized room comp for a lost elderly CEO had apparently already made its way through the staff grapevine, despite it only being a few hours old. You really put your job on the line for some random old guy? Janet asked finally, her tone more intrigued than judgmental. That's either really noble or really stupid, and I haven't decided which yet. Marcus managed a tired smile. Probably both, he admitted. But I couldn't live with myself if I'd just sent him away, and something bad happened to him. My mom used to say that character is what you do when nobody's watching, and there's no reward coming, and I guess that stuck with me. Janet nodded thoughtfully, her fingers pausing on her keyboard. That's actually pretty profound for 2 in the morning. Your mom sounds like she was a wise woman. The words sent the familiar pang through Marcus's chest, that mix of love and loss that would probably never fully fade, and he found himself telling Janet the abbreviated version of his mother's illness and death, something he rarely talked about with co-workers because it felt too raw and personal to share in a workplace that demanded cheerfulness and professionalism. But tonight, sitting in the harsh fluorescent light with exhaustion lowering his usual defenses, the words came more easily. She would have liked that you did this, Janet said when he finished. Helped someone who needed it even when it cost you something. That's the kind of thing parents hope they've taught their kids, you know? Marcus was saved from having to respond by his phone buzzing with a text from Diane, who apparently also couldn't sleep and was working from home coordinating the various moving pieces of the Mr. Harrison situation. The message read, Dr. Reeves just completed the 4 a.m. check. Patient stable and sleeping peacefully. Go home and get some rest. We'll tackle the morning calls together at 9 a.m. Good work tonight. He showed the text to Janet and then gathered his things, suddenly feeling the full weight of the long shift and emotional roller coaster pressing down on his shoulders. The walk to his car in the employee parking garage felt longer than usual, and the drive home through empty streets gave him too much time to think about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. But by the time he reached his apartment, he'd decided to trust that things would work out because they had to, because the alternative was too depressing to contemplate. His apartment was a studio in an older building, nothing fancy but clean and affordable, and Marcus collapsed onto his bed still wearing his work clothes, too tired to bother with his usual nighttime routine. He set an alarm for 8 a.m. to give himself time to shower and grab breakfast before meeting Diane, and then he was asleep almost instantly, his last conscious thought a half-formed hope that Mr. Harrison was resting comfortably and would wake up feeling better and more himself. When Marcus's alarm dragged him back to consciousness 6 hours later, his first action was to check his phone for any emergency messages, and finding none, he allowed himself a moment of relief before hauling himself out of bed and into the shower. The hot water helped clear some of the fog from his brain, and by the time he was dressed in a fresh uniform and eating a quick breakfast of cereal and coffee, he felt almost human again. He arrived at the Grand Meridian at 8:45 earlier than necessary, but unable to wait any longer, and found Diane already in the back office with her own coffee and a notepad filled with what looked like a detailed action plan. Morning, she greeted him, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I've been doing some research while you were sleeping. Harrison Industries is headquartered in Philadelphia, but they have regional offices in 12 cities including ours, and according to their corporate website, they're currently in the middle of a major merger negotiation that's been all over the business news. The board meeting Mr. Harrison is supposed to attend today is actually a crucial presentation to potential investors, which means he absolutely cannot miss it or look unreliable." Marcus felt his anxiety spike at this information, because it meant the stakes were even higher than he'd realized. "Does that mean we need to wake him up early to make sure he's ready?" he asked. Diane shook her head. "I already had Maria do a check at 7:30 and he was awake and showering, so he's apparently got his internal clock still functioning even if his memory and orientation are compromised. What we need to do is track down his assistant Catherine and get her here ASAP to take over his care and provide him with whatever he needs for this meeting. I found a LinkedIn profile for a Catherine Morrison who lists herself as executive assistant to the CEO at Harrison Industries, and I have the company's main number ready to call as soon as they open at 9. The next 15 minutes crawled by while they waited for 9 a.m. to arrive, and Marcus used the time to review the list of hotels Diane had compiled that matched Mr. Harrison's vague description, making notes about which ones to prioritize based on their proximity to the Belmont Conference Center where the board meeting was scheduled. Finally, at exactly 9 o'clock, Diane dialed Harrison Industries' main number and navigated through the automated directory until she reached the executive offices, where a receptionist with a crisp professional voice answered and asked how she could direct the call. "I need to speak with Catherine Morrison urgently regarding Mr. William Harrison," Diane said, her tone striking the perfect balance between authoritative and concerned. "This is Diane Fletcher, night manager at the Grand Meridian Hotel, and we have Mr. Harrison here as a guest following an incident last night that requires immediate attention." There was a brief pause, then the sound of typing, and the receptionist's voice took on a new urgency. "Please hold, I'm connecting you to Miss Morrison's direct line now." The hold music lasted less than 30 seconds before a woman's voice came on the line, tight with worry. "This is Catherine Morrison. Where is Mr. Harrison? We've been looking for him since midnight when he didn't return to the Riverside Inn and wasn't answering his phone. Is he all right?" Diane activated the speakerphone so Marcus could hear both sides of the conversation, and then quickly but thoroughly explained the events of the previous night, emphasizing that Miss Harrison was physically safe but had shown signs of confusion and disorientation that had prompted them to provide him with a room and medical attention. Catherine listened without interrupting, and when Diane finished there was a heavy sigh of relief mixed with frustration. "Thank God you found him and kept him safe," Catherine said. "Mr. Harrison has been under enormous stress with this merger, working 18-hour days and not sleeping enough, and his doctor recently adjusted his blood pressure medication, which has been causing some side effects. I should have been watching him more carefully, but he insisted on going out for a walk alone after dinner to clear his head, and when he didn't come back I didn't know where to even start looking. I filed a missing person report with the police at midnight, but they said they'd wait until morning to actively search since he's an adult and had only been gone a few hours." Diane made eye contact with Marcus and nodded slightly, a gesture that said their decision not to involve police last night had been the right call. "We're glad we could help," Diane said. "The important thing now is getting Mr. Harrison the support he needs for his meeting today and making sure he gets proper medical follow-up. Our hotel doctor examined him last night and recommended a full neurological workup, which Mr. Harrison refused, but perhaps you can convince him." Catherine was already typing audibly, probably scheduling appointments and rearranging logistics at lightning speed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes with fresh clothes, his briefing materials, and his phone which was charging in his hotel room," she said. "And yes, I'll make sure he sees his regular doctor today after the meeting, even if I have to physically drag him there. Can you please let Mr. Harrison know I'm coming and that everything is under control?" They exchanged contact information and confirmed the details, and after the call ended,
Diane leaned back in her chair with a satisfied expression. Well, that went about as well as we could have hoped, she said. Now let's go give Mr. Harrison the good news.
Marcus accompanied Diane to the 8th floor, his heart beating faster with each number that lit up on the elevator panel, and when they reached room 814, Diane knocked firmly, but gently on the door. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of movement inside, and Mr. Harrison opened the door looking significantly better than he had the night before, his silver hair neatly combed, and his face clean-shaven, though the white bandage on his forehead stood out starkly against his skin, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a difficult night. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," Diane said with a warm professional smile. "I'm Diane Fletcher, the night manager here at the Grand Meridian. May we come in for a moment? We have some good news for you." Mr. Harrison stepped back to allow them entry, and Marcus noticed that the elderly man moved with more confidence this morning, his steps steady and his eyes clear in a way they hadn't been during the confused wandering of the previous night. The room showed signs of occupancy but remained relatively neat, with Mr. Harrison's rumpled suit from yesterday draped over a chair and his briefcase sitting open on the desk, where he'd apparently been reviewing some documents. "I owe you both an enormous apology," Mr. Harrison began as soon as the door closed, his refined voice carrying genuine embarrassment. "I'm told that I was quite confused and disoriented last night, though I must confess my memories of the evening are rather fragmented and unclear. What I do remember is Marcus here treating me with extraordinary kindness and patience when many others would have simply turned away." Diane glanced at Marcus with an expression that suggested she was seeing him with new appreciation, then returned her attention to Mr. Harris. "Marcus did exactly what we would hope any member of our staff would do when encountering a guest in distress, though I'll admit he went somewhat above and beyond standard protocol. But we're not here to discuss that. We're here to let you know that we've located your assistant, Catherine Morrison, and she's on her way here now, with everything you need for your board meeting this morning." The relief that washed over Mr. Harrison's face was profound, and he actually had to sit down on the edge of the bed as if his legs had suddenly gone weak. "Catherine knows where I am," he said, and it wasn't quite a question, more like he was confirming something too good to be true. "She's not worried anymore. She knows I'm safe." Marcus stepped forward slightly, feeling like he should contribute to the conversation rather than just standing there silent. "She was very worried," he admitted, "and she filed a missing person report with the police last night, when you didn't return to your hotel, the Riverside Inn. But she's relieved now, and on her way here, and she said she'll make sure you have everything you need for the meeting. She also wants you to see your regular doctor today for a follow-up about last night." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, processing this information, and then he looked directly at Marcus with that same intense searching gaze from the night before. "The Riverside Inn," he repeated. "Of course, how could I have forgotten? It has white columns and red carpet, exactly as I described, but for some reason last night I simply couldn't make my mind hold on to that information. It was terrifying, if I'm being honest, feeling like my own brain had betrayed me and I couldn't trust even my most basic perception." The vulnerability in his voice made Marcus's chest tighten with sympathy, because he remembered his mother describing similar feelings during her worst days, that horrible sensation of losing control over your own mind and not knowing if you'd ever get it back. Dr. Reeves mentioned that it could have been related to your head injury combined with stress and possibly medication side effects. Marcus said gently, "The important thing is that you're safe now, and you have people looking out for you." Mr. Harrison stood up again and crossed to where his briefcase sat open, pulling out one of the business cards Marcus had seen the night before, and holding it for a moment as if weighing a decision. "I don't typically do this," he said slowly, "because I've learned over the years that people often have ulterior motives when they're kind to someone in my position. But I believe you, Marcus genuinely had no idea who I was or what resources I have at my disposal when you decided to help me. You saw someone vulnerable, and you acted with compassion, at considerable personal risk to your job and finances, and that's increasingly rare in this world." He held out the business card to Marcus, who accepted it automatically without understanding what was being offered. "I want you to call my office next week," Mr. Harrison continued. "Ask for Catherine and tell her I requested that you be put through to me directly. I'd like to discuss how someone with your character and judgment might fit into my organization,
because Harrison Industries is always looking for people who understand that business success starts with treating people as human beings rather than transactions. Marcus stared at the business card in his hand, his mind struggling to process what was being offered, and he could feel Diane beside him going very still as she too realized the significance of the moment. "Mr. Harrison, I appreciate that, but I didn't help you to get a job offer," Marcus managed to say, though his voice came out rough with emotion. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do, and I'm just glad you're okay." A small smile crossed Mr. Harrison's distinguished features. "I know that, Marcus, which is precisely why I'm making the offer. Do you have any idea how many people in my world only ever see me as a means to an end, as someone whose wealth and influence can be leveraged for their own benefit? Last night you saw me as a person who needed help, nothing more and nothing less, and you provided that help at cost to yourself. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Before Marcus could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door, and a woman's voice called out, "Mr. Harrison, it's Catherine, I'm here." Mr. Harrison moved to open the door, and a whirlwind of efficient energy swept into the room in the form of a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, perfectly styled dark hair, and the kind of purposeful movement that suggested she could organize a military operation or a dinner party with equal competence. Catherine immediately began assessing Mr. Harrison with a practiced eye, noting the bandage on his forehead and the tired lines around his eyes, and her expression shifted from relief to determination. "We need to get you changed and briefed into the Belmont Center by 10:30, which gives us exactly 90 minutes, she said, already pulling a garment bag and leather portfolio from the items she'd brought. "I've also scheduled an appointment with Dr. Chen for this afternoon at 3, and before you start arguing about it, I've already cleared your evening schedule and informed the board that you'll be unavailable for the dinner meeting tonight because you need medical attention." Mr. Harrison looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it, and instead he turned back to Marcus and Diane. "I need to prepare for this meeting, but I want you both to know that the Grand Meridian has earned a customer for life, and I'll be making sure your corporate offices hear about the exceptional service provided by your team. Marcus, don't forget to call my office next week." "I meant what I said." Catherine had pulled out her phone and was already typing notes. "What's your full name?" she asked Marcus, her fingers flying across the screen. "I'm adding a reminder to my calendar to follow up on Mr. Harrison's job offer, and I want to make sure we have your correct contact information." Marcus provided his details in a daze, still not quite believing this was actually happening, and Catherine efficiently captured everything before turning her attention to coordinating the logistics of getting Mr. Harrison ready for his crucial board meeting. Diane gently touched Marcus's elbow and guided him toward the door, understanding that their presence was no longer needed and that Catherine had the situation well in hand. "We'll leave you to prepare," Diane said to the room in general. "Mr. Harrison, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call the front desk." As they rode the elevator back down to the lobby, Diane turned to Marcus with an expression that combined pride and amazement. "Do you understand what just happened?" she asked. "That man is worth hundreds of millions of dollars and he just offered you a job at his company. This could completely change your life." Marcus looked down at the business card still clutched in his hand, William Harrison's name embossed in elegant lettering above the Harrison Industries logo, and he felt the weight of possibility settling over him like a warm blanket. "I just wanted to help someone who needed it," he said quietly. "I never expected anything like this." Diane smiled and shook her head. "That's exactly why it happened," she said. "You did the right thing for the right reasons, and sometimes, not always but sometimes, that actually gets reward. Now come on, we still have paperwork to file about last night's incident, and I want to make sure we document everything properly before corporate starts asking questions."
The week that followed Mr. Harrison's dramatic appearance and departure felt both impossibly long and strangely compressed, each day blurring into the next, while Marcus went through the motions of his regular job duties and tried not to obsess over the business card that sat on his small kitchen table like a beacon of impossible hope. He'd told himself a dozen times that he should just call Harrison Industries and take the man up on his offer, that anyone with sense would jump at the chance to work for a major corporation with better pay and benefits and actual career advancement opportunities. But every time he picked up his phone to dial, he found himself hesitating. The Grand Meridian felt safe and familiar despite its problems, and Marcus had spent 3 years building relationships with co-workers like Diane, who'd proven they had his back when it mattered, and there was something terrifying about throwing that away. to chase a promise made by a man who'd been confused and disoriented when he made it? What if Mr. Harrison didn't actually remember offering him a job? Or what if he'd just been being polite in the moment and hadn't really meant for Marcus to follow up? Or what if Marcus called and got Catherine on the phone and she had no idea what he was talking about? Because Mr. Harrison had never bothered to mention it after leaving the hotel, the anxiety spiraled in his mind during quiet moments at work, and he found himself making mistakes he normally wouldn't make, forgetting guest requests or mixing up reservation details in ways that earned him concerned looks from Diane and gentle corrections from his co-workers. On Thursday afternoon, 5 days after the incident with Mr. Harrison, Marcus was processing a checkout for a business traveler when Diane appeared at his elbow and pulled him aside with an expression that suggested this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, and his stomach dropped because those 4 words never preceded good news. "Come to the office when you finish with that guest." He completed the checkout with his professional smile firmly in place, thanked the guest for staying with them, and wished him safe travels, and then made his way to Diane's office with a sense of impending doom. She was sitting at her desk with her computer screen turned toward him, and displayed on it was an email that made Marcus's heart skip a beat. "This came through to our corporate feedback system this morning," Diane said, gesturing at the screen. "It's from William Harrison, Chairman and CEO of Harrison Industries, and it's addressed to the Regional Director of Operations with copies to about 15 different executives in our corporate structure. Would you like to know what it said?" Marcus nodded mutely, his throat too tight to speak, and Diane read aloud in a measured tone that suggested she'd already read it several times. "To whom it may concern, I am writing to formally commend the exceptional service provided by your employee Marcus Chen and night manager Diane Fletcher at the Grand Meridian Hotel location on the evening of November 7th. During a personal medical emergency that left me disoriented and vulnerable, Mr. Chen demonstrated extraordinary compassion, judgment, and professionalism that went far beyond standard hospitality service. He personally ensured my safety and well-being at considerable personal risk to his position and finances, and his actions reflect the highest standards of human decency and customer care. Fletcher provided crucial support and leadership in coordinating my care and tracking down my company contacts, displaying the kind of management capability that your organization should recognize and reward. I have stayed at hundreds of hotels throughout my business career, and I can honestly say that I have never received more thoughtful or compassionate service than I experienced at your property that night. Both Mr. Chen and Fletcher are assets to your organization and deserve recognition for their exceptional performance. Please consider this letter my strongest possible recommendation for both employees. Additionally, Harrison Industries will be relocating all of our corporate travel bookings to Grand Meridian properties going forward, representing approximately $2 million in annual revenue. This decision is a direct result of the service I received from your team. Sincerely, William Harrison. Diane looked up from the screen and Marcus could see she was fighting back emotion, her eyes bright with tears that professionalism wouldn't quite let her shed. "Do you have any idea what this means?" she asked. "Corporate is losing their minds over this, in a good way. The regional director called me personally this morning to tell me that both of us are being promoted, you to guest services supervisor with a 40% pay increase, and me to assistant general manager with relocation to the flagship property in the city center. They're also writing off that room charge completely and giving both of us bonuses for customer service excellence." Marcus felt like the floor had dropped out from under him, and he was floating in some alternate reality, where good things actually happened to people who'd spent years just trying to survive. 40%, he repeated numbly. That would be enough to finally clear my mother's medical bills and actually start saving money." Diane smiled, and this time she let the tears come. "You earned it, Marcus. You did something genuinely good without expecting any reward, and sometimes the universe actually pays attention to that. I'm so proud of you." They sat together in the office for a while longer, discussing the practical details of the promotions and what the transitions would look like, and gradually Marcus's shock began to give way to a cautious joy that felt almost too fragile to trust. The promotion at the Grand Meridian was amazing, life-changing in fact, but there was still that business card sitting on his kitchen table and the job offer that Miss Harrison had extended, and Marcus found himself wondering if he should still call or if accepting the promotion here meant he'd be burning a bridge with Harrison Industries. "You're thinking about his job offer, aren't you?" Diane said,
reading his expression with the ease of someone who'd worked with him for years. Marcus, you need to call him. This promotion is wonderful and you should absolutely take it, if that's what you want, but you also need to at least explore what Mr. Harrison is offering, because it might be even better. Don't make decisions based on fear of disappointing people or fear that good things can't actually happen to you. Her words hit home in a way that made Marcus uncomfortable because she was right. He was making decisions based on fear, and that wasn't how he wanted to live his life. His mother had always told him to be brave, to take chances when they were offered, to believe that he deserved good things just as much as anyone else did. Okay, he said, pulling out his phone before he could talk himself out of it. I'm going to call right now while I have the courage. Diane nodded approvingly and stood up to give him privacy, closing the office door behind her as she left, and Marcus was alone with his phone and the number for Harrison Industries that he'd already programmed into his contacts days ago, but hadn't been brave enough to dial. He took a deep breath, pressed the call button, and listened to it ring 3 times before a professional voice answered. Harrison Industries, how may I direct your call? The receptionist asked. Catherine Morrison, please, Marcus said, surprised that his voice came out steady. This is Marcus Chen calling. Mr. Harrison asked me to reach out to him through Catherine. There was a brief pause and the sound of typing. Of course, Mr. Chen, Miss Morrison has been expecting your call. Please hold while I transfer you. The hold music was mercifully brief, and then Catherine's efficient voice came on the line. Marcus, finally, Mr. Harrison has been asking me every day if you'd called yet. He was starting to worry that you weren't going to take him up on his offer. Are you available to come in for a meeting tomorrow afternoon? Mr. Harrison would like to discuss opportunities within our organization personally. Marcus felt his pulse quicken with a mixture of excitement and terror. Yes, I can make that work, he said. What time and where should I come? Catherine provided the details with brisk efficiency, booking him for a 2 p.m. meeting at Harrison Industries regional headquarters in the business district, and as Marcus wrote down the information he felt like he was stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. After the call ended, he sat in Diane's office for a long moment just processing everything that had happened in the span of 20 minutes, his entire life trajectory shifting in ways he couldn't quite comprehend. When Diane returned and saw his expression, she didn't need to ask how the call had gone. You've got the meeting, she said, and it wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Diane, what am I supposed to wear? I don't even own a suit, just my hotel uniforms and some casual clothes. How do I prepare for a meeting with a CEO? Diane laughed, warm and genuine, and pulled out her phone. Leave that to me, she said. My brother is about your size and he's got several good suits from when he was working corporate before he switched to teaching. I'll call him right now and arrange for you to borrow one, and tomorrow morning you and I are going to have a practice interview session, so you're prepared for whatever Mr. Harrison might ask. You're not going into this unprepared, not on my.
The Harrison Industries regional headquarters occupied the top 12 floors of a gleaming glass tower in the business district, and as Marcus rode the elevator up to the executive level on Friday afternoon, he kept tugging at the collar of his borrowed suit and reminding himself to breathe normally. Diane's brother's suit fit reasonably well with only minor adjustments needed, a charcoal grey with subtle pinstripes that looked professional without being ostentatious, and Diane had insisted he borrow one of her husband's ties to complete the outfit, a burgundy silk that she said brought out warmth in his complexion. The morning practice session had helped calm some of his nerves, with Diane firing likely interview questions at him and coaching him on how to frame his limited work experience in terms that would resonate with corporate executives. But now that he was actually here, walking through the polished reception area toward Catherine's desk, all that preparation felt inadequate against the reality of the situation. Catherine looked up from her computer as he approached and her serious expression softened into a genuine smile. Marcus, right on time. Excellent, she said, standing to shake his hand with a firm grip that conveyed both welcome and assessment. Mr. Harrison is just finishing up a conference call, but he should be ready in a few minutes. Can I get you anything while you wait? Water, coffee, tea? Marcus accepted a bottle of water just to have something to do with his hands, and Catherine gestured for him to take a seat in the waiting area outside Mr. Harrison's office, the space decorated with expensive modern art and furniture that probably cost more than Marcus's car. He tried not to fidget as he waited, focusing on the breathing exercises his mother had taught him years ago for managing anxiety, and after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, The door to Mr. Harrison's office opened and the elderly CEO emerged looking healthy and energetic, no trace remaining of the confused, vulnerable man from a week ago. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Mr. Harrison said, extending his hand for a warm handshake. "Please, come in, let's talk." The office was everything Marcus had expected from a successful CEO, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering stunning views of the city skyline, furniture that managed to be both luxurious and functional, and personal touches like family photos and awards that spoke to a long and distinguished career. Mr. Harrison gestured for Marcus to take one of the leather chairs positioned around a small conference table, rather than sitting formally at his massive desk, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a conversation between equals than a traditional job interview. "First, I want to thank you again for what you did for me that night," Mr. Harrison began, settling into his chair with the ease of someone completely comfortable in his own space. "I've had time to process what happened, and to discuss it with my doctor and my family, and I understand now just how dangerous that situation could have been if you hadn't intervened." The doctor confirmed that I had a mild concussion combined with adverse effects from a new medication, which created a temporary state of confusion that could have led to serious injury or worse if I'd continued wandering alone. Marcus nodded, relieved to hear that Miss Harrison's condition had been temporary and treatable. "I'm glad you're feeling better," he said, "and I'm glad I was able to help, though honestly I'm still a bit overwhelmed by everything that's happened since then. Diane showed me the letter you sent to the Grand Meridian corporate offices, and I want you to know that you didn't have to do that. The promotion they're offering me is more than I ever expected." Mr. Harrison waved a dismissive hand. "That letter was the least I could do, and frankly it was as much about ensuring that hotel recognizes the value of the employees they have, as it was about rewarding you specifically. But let's talk about why I asked you here, because I have a proposition that I think could be mutually beneficial." He pulled out a folder from the stack on the conference table and opened it to reveal what looked like a job description and organizational chart. "Harrison Industries has been growing rapidly over the past decade, expanding from our core manufacturing business into service industries, technology and real estate development. One of the challenges we've identified is that as we've grown, we've sometimes lost sight of the human element that should be at the center of all business operations. We have brilliant strategists and financial experts, but we need people who understand that our success ultimately depends on how we treat the people who work for us and the customers we serve." Marcus listened intently, trying to follow where this was going, and Mr. Harrison continued, "I want to create a new position within our organization, Director of Customer Experience and Employee Relations, someone who will work across all our business units to ensure that we're maintaining the highest standards of service and treating our employees with the dignity and respect they deserve. This person would report directly to me and would have significant authority to implement changes and hold executive accountable for how their divisions treat people. Based on what I observed of your judgment, compassion and character, I think you could excel in this role with the right training and support." Marcus felt like he'd been hit by a truck, the scope of what was being offered so far beyond anything he'd imagined that he struggled to formulate a coherent response. "Mr. Harrison, I appreciate your confidence in me, but I need to be honest," he finally managed. "I don't have a college degree, I've only worked in hospitality for 3 years, and I have zero experience with corporate operations or organizational management. I'm not sure I'm qualified for the kind of position you're describing." Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair and studied Marcus with that same intense measuring gaze from their first meeting. "Let me tell you something I've learned over 40 years in business," he said. "Technical skills can be taught, industry knowledge can be acquired, credentials can be earned, but character and integrity are either present or they're not. I can hire a dozen people with MBAs and decades of corporate experience, but finding someone who will make the right decision when no one is watching and there's no immediate reward, that's infinitely more rare and valuable." He pushed the folder across the table toward Mark. "I'm not expecting you to step into this role immediately and know everything. I'm proposing that you join Harrison Industries in a development track position, starting as my executive assistant for special projects, where you'll learn our business from the inside while working directly with me on high-priority initiatives. Over the next year or two, you'll gain the knowledge and experience you need while we assess whether this is the right fit for both of us, and if it works out the way I expect it will, you'll transition into the director role with full executive compensation and authority." Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands and nearly choked when he saw the salary figure listed for the executive assistant position, a number that was more than double what his promotion at the Grand Meridian would pay,
and included benefits that seemed almost too good to be real. This is incredibly generous, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I need to ask, why me specifically? You must encounter hundreds of people in your business dealings. Why am I the one you're offering this opportunity to? Mr. Harrison's expression grew serious and somewhat melancholy. Because you reminded me of someone, he said quietly. 42 years ago, when I was a young man just starting out in business, I made a series of catastrophically bad decisions that left me bankrupt, divorced, and seriously considering ending my own life. I was sleeping in my car and trying to figure out how I'd fallen so far so fast, and one night a woman who ran a small diner saw me in her parking lot and brought me out a meal without being asked, without expecting anything in return. She told me that everyone deserves kindness when they're at their lowest, and that the measure of a person isn't whether they fall down but whether they choose to get back up. He paused, clearly moved by the memory, and Marcus waited quietly for him to continue. That woman's name was Rosa Martinez, and her small act of kindness gave me the strength to rebuild my life. I went on to create Harrison Industries and achieve success beyond anything I'd imagined possible, and I've spent the past 4 decades trying to pay forward the compassion she showed me by helping others when I can. When you helped me that night at the hotel, you reminded me of Rosa, of that fundamental belief that people deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of their circumstance. That's the kind of person I want in my organization, someone who leads with their humanity first and their business acumen second. Marcus felt tears pricking at his eyes and had to blink rapidly to keep them from falling, his mother's voice echoing in his memory with all the lessons she'd taught him about kindness and character and doing what's right even when it costs you something. My mother would have liked you, he said softly. She believed in those same principles, that how you treat people matters more than what you achieve or how much money you make. She died 8 months ago, and sometimes I worry that I'm not living up to what she tried to teach me, but helping you that night felt like honoring her memory. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for further words. Your mother raised you well, Marcus, and accepting this position would be a way of continuing her legacy, of spreading the kind of compassion she instilled in you to a broader sphere of influence. Take the weekend to think about it, discuss it with people you trust, and call Catherine on Monday with your decision. I won't pressure you either way, but I hope you'll seriously consider what we're offering here. Marcus stood, his legs feeling unsteady, and shook Harrison's hand with as much firmness as he could muster. I will, I promise. Thank you for this opportunity, regardless of what I decide. Catherine walked him back to the elevator, providing him with additional materials about Harrison Industries and answering his questions about benefits, relocation assistance, and the timeline for starting if he accepted. As the elevator descended toward ground level, Marcus clutched the folder to his chest and tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened, his entire future suddenly branching in 2 distinct directions, and both of them offering possibilities he'd never dared to imagine.
Marcus spent the entire weekend wrestling with the decision that had been laid before him, the folder from Harrison Industries spread out on his kitchen table alongside notes he'd made about the pros and cons of each path forward. The promotion at the Grand Meridian represented safety and familiarity, a significant improvement in his current life that would allow him to finally clear his debts and build some financial security within an environment he understood and trusted. The position at Harrison Industries represented transformation and risk, a leap into corporate waters where he had no experience and no safety net, but also the chance to work directly with a man he respected and to potentially create meaningful change across an entire organization. He called Diane on Saturday afternoon and talked through his confusion for nearly an hour, grateful for her patient willingness to help him process without pushing him toward any particular choice. The question you need to ask yourself, Diane finally said, is which option would your mother tell you to take, and which one would you regret not taking when you look back on this moment 10 years from now? That night Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about his mother, remembering conversations they'd had during her illness about dreams deferred and opportunities missed, about how her own life had been shaped by playing it safe and choosing security over passion. She'd been a teacher who'd wanted to be a writer, but fear of financial instability had kept her in a job that paid the bills but never quite fulfilled her creative spirit, and she'd told Marcus during one of their late-night hospital talks that her biggest regret was not taking more chances when she'd had the health and energy to pursue them. Don't let fear make your decisions for you, she'd said, her voice weak but fear will always counsel you toward the smallest life possible, the path with the least risk and the least possibility of extraordinary joy. Be braver than I was, Marcus. Be willing to fail spectacularly if it means you might also succeed beyond your wildest dreams. Sunday morning, Marcus went to visit his mother's grave for the first time in several weeks, bringing fresh flowers and sitting on the grass beside her headstone while he talked through his dilemma as if she could still hear and respond. He told her about Miss Harrison and the hotel incident and the impossible opportunities that had emerged from one night of choosing compassion over convenience, and as he spoke he felt something settle in his chest, a clarity that hadn't been there before. His mother had spent her life being careful and practical, making the safe choices that ensured survival but rarely allowed for growth or transformation, and she'd explicitly told him not to repeat her mistakes, to be brave enough to reach for the extraordinary even if it meant risking failure. Taking the promotion at the Grand Meridian would be honoring the cautious, fearful part of his mother's legacy, while accepting Mr. Harrison's offer would be honoring the part of her that had dreams and regrets and wished she'd been braver. "I'm going to take the job at Harrison Industries," Marcus said aloud to the headstone, and speaking the words made them real in a way that thinking them hadn't quite accomplished. "I'm terrified that I'll fail, that I'm not qualified or smart enough or prepared for what they're asking of me, but I'm more afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd just had the courage to try. You always said character matters more than credentials, and Miss Harrison seems to believe that too, so I'm going to trust that and see where it leads." He stayed at the cemetery for another hour, telling his mother about the specifics of the position and the development track Miss Harrison had outlined, and when he finally left he felt lighter than he had in months, as if making the decision had released some weight he'd been carrying without fully realizing it. Monday morning, Marcus called Catherine Morrison at exactly 9 a.m. as she'd requested and informed her that he was accepting the position, and the relief and excitement in her voice suggested that she'd genuinely been worried he might turn it down. "Mr. Harrison will be thrilled," she said. "I'll start processing all the paperwork today and we'll need you to come in tomorrow to handle employment documents and security clearance. Your official start date will be 2 weeks from today, which should give you time to provide proper notice to the Grand Meridian and handle any personal affairs before transitioning. Welcome to Harrison Industries, Marcus. I have a feeling you're going to do great things here." His next call was to Diane, and she answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting for it. "You're taking the Harrison job," she said before he could speak, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I can tell from the tone of your hello you've made your decision and you feel good about it." Marcus laughed, grateful for how well she knew him. "How could you possibly tell that from one word?" he asked. "Because you sound like yourself again," Diane replied. "The past week you've been tied in knots with anxiety and second-guessing, but right now you sound confident and settled, which means you've made the choice your heart wanted even if your head was arguing for the safer option. I'm happy for you, Marcus. Truly, even though it means I'm losing the best employee I've ever supervised." They talked logistics about his final 2 weeks at the Grand Meridian, and Diane insisted on throwing him a small going-away party with the staff who'd become his work family over the past 3 years. And by the time Marcus hung up the phone, he felt both excited about the future and melancholy about leaving behind the place that had been his professional home during some of the hardest years of his life. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of training his replacement, processing exit paperwork, and attending meetings at Harrison Industries to begin his onboarding process. Catherine proved to be an invaluable guide through the corporate landscape, introducing him to key executives and explaining the unwritten rules and political dynamics that governed how work actually got done in a large organization. Harrison himself checked in regularly, taking Marcus to lunch twice and walking him through the strategic priorities he'd be focusing on once he officially started. On Marcus's last day at the Grand Meridian, the evening shift staff gathered in the employee break room for the party Diane had organized, and there were speeches and jokes and a card signed by everyone expressing appreciation for his dedication and friendship. Diane presented him with a gift from the entire team, a leather-bound journal embossed with his name and the words "The best is yet to come." And when Marcus opened it, he found that the first page contained a quote his mother used to say: "Character is not built in moments of comfort, but in moments when we choose compassion over convenience." "We wanted you to have something to remind you of where you came from and what matters most," Diane said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to do amazing things at Harrison Industries, Marcus, but don't forget that the reason you got this opportunity is because you were willing to see someone's humanity when it would have been easier to look away. Take that with you wherever you go."
Marcus hugged her tightly, not trusting himself to speak without breaking down completely, and then made his way around the room, thanking each person individually for their support and friendship. When he finally left the Grand Meridian that night, walking out through the elegant lobby where he'd first encountered Mr. Harrison 2 weeks earlier, he paused to take one last look at the marble floors and crystal chandeliers and the reception desk where he'd spent so many hours. This place had been his anchor during storm, the source of income that had kept him afloat while his mother was dying and the medical bills were piling up, and leaving it felt both liberating and terrifying in equal measure. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "See you tomorrow at 8 a.m., ready to start your new life." Marcus typed back a simple "ready," and stepped out into the cool evening air, the city lights spreading out before him like a map of possibilities, and for the first time in longer than he could remember he felt truly hopeful about what the future might hold.
Marcus's first official day at Harrison Industries began with an orientation session in a conference room on the executive floor, where Catherine had assembled a packet of materials so comprehensive it could have doubled as a textbook on corporate operations. She walked him through organizational charts, strategic priorities, key personnel relationships, and the various projects that Mr. Harrison had identified as potential areas for his involvement once he'd completed the initial learning phase. The scope of responsibility being entrusted to him would have been overwhelming if Catherine hadn't been so skilled at breaking complex information into manageable pieces, and by mid-morning, Marcus felt like he at least had a basic framework for understanding how the various parts of Harrison Industries fit together to create a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Mr. Harrison himself appeared just before lunch, looking energetic and pleased as he welcomed Marcus officially to the team. "I want you to shadow me for the first month," he explained as they walked together toward the executive dining room. "Attend all my meetings, read all my correspondence, observe how decisions get made at this level of the organization. You'll learn more from immersion than you ever would from training manuals, and it will give us a chance to discuss situations as they arise and explore how your perspective might differ from the approaches we've traditionally taken." The dining room was an elegant space reserved for senior executives and important guests, and Marcus felt distinctly out of place among the expensive suits and confident manner of people who'd spent entire careers learning to project authority. Mr. Harrison seemed to sense his discomfort and made a point of introducing him to everyone they encountered, framing Marcus not as an assistant or subordinate, but as a colleague working on special projects of strategic importance to the CEO, positioning that immediately changed how people responded to him. Over the next several weeks, Marcus threw himself into learning everything he could about Harrison Industries operations, spending his days attending meetings and strategy sessions, and his evenings reading reports and industry analyses until his eyes blurred with exhaustion. Catherine became his informal mentor, teaching him how to navigate corporate politics without compromising his principles, how to recognize when someone was being genuine versus when they were positioning for advantage, how to frame ideas in language that would resonate with different audiences. Mr. Harrison proved to be a patient and thoughtful teacher, regularly pausing during meetings to explain context that Marcus wouldn't have understood otherwise, and creating space for Marcus to ask questions that might have seemed naive or obvious to more experienced executives. What surprised Marcus most was how quickly he began to see patterns in how the company operated, inefficiencies and disconnects that became obvious once he understood the larger systems at play. There were departments that rarely communicated with each other despite working on related problems, employee concerns that were consistently dismissed because no one with authority was listening to frontline workers, customer complaints that revealed fundamental flaws in product design, but never made it to the people who could authorize change. 3 months into his tenure, Marcus prepared his first formal presentation for Mr. Harrison, a comprehensive analysis of customer service issues across Harrison Industries' hospitality division based on his own experience in the hotel industry. He'd spent weeks gathering data, interviewing employees, reviewing complaint records, and synthesizing everything into a proposal for restructuring how the division approached customer relations. And he was terrified that his recommendations would be dismissed as too idealistic or impractical by executives who'd been in the industry for decades. Harrison listened intently to the entire presentation without interrupting, occasionally making notes but mostly just absorbing the information Marcus had compiled. When it ended, there was a long silence while the CEO reviewed his notes, and Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the climate-controlled comfort of the conference room. "This is exactly what I hoped you'd bring to this organization," Harrison finally said, looking up with an expression of genuine satisfaction. "You've identified problems that have been sitting in plain sight for years, but no one with your perspective was in position to recognize and articulate them. Some of these recommendations will face resistance from division management who've been doing things the same way for decades. But I want you to work with Catherine to implement them anyway, starting with a pilot program at 3 properties. We'll measure results over 6 months, and if the data supports your approach, we'll scale it across the entire division." Marcus felt a surge of pride and validation that made the long hours and steep learning curve suddenly feel worthwhile. Over the following year, he led implementation of the customer service reforms, traveled to Harrison Industries properties across the country to train staff and gather feedback, and gradually built credibility within the organization as someone whose ideas produced measurable results. Mr. Harrison increasingly relied on him for perspective on employee relations issues and customer experience challenges, and the informal development track began to transform into something more substantial and permanent. 18 months after leaving the Grand Meridian, Marcus was formally promoted to Director of Customer Experience and Employee Relations with a compensation package that would have seemed impossible during his hotel days, and was given authority to build a team and implement systemic changes across all of Harrison Industries' business units. He hired carefully, looking for people who combined technical competence with the kind of character and compassion that had defined his own approach, and created a department culture that valued both results and how those results were achieved. One evening, Marcus was working late in his office, now a proper executive space with windows overlooking the city, when Mr. Harrison knocked on his open door and entered without waiting for invitation. "I wanted to show you something," the elderly CEO said, pulling out his phone and displaying a customer review from one of the hospitality properties where Marcus's reforms had been implemented. The review described in glowing terms how a hotel employee had gone out of his way to help a guest experiencing a family emergency, providing not just logistical support, but genuine human compassion that had made an unbearable situation slightly more bearable. "This is the third review like this I've seen this month from properties running your program," Mr. Harrison said. "You're creating a culture where people feel empowered to lead with their humanity, exactly like you did the night we met. That's going to be your lasting legacy here, Marcus, not any specific policy or procedure, but the way you're changing how thousands of employees think about their relationship with the people they serve." Marcus felt emotion tightening his throat as he read the review again, recognizing in the employee's actions the same impulses that had driven him to help a confused elderly man in a hotel lobby what now felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm just trying to create the kind of workplace my mother would have wanted to be part of," he said quietly. "A place where doing the right thing is valued and rewarded, where people matter more than profit margins, even though those things don't have to be mutually exclusive." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, his weathered face reflecting satisfaction and perhaps a hint of the melancholy that came from knowing his own time was limited. "I'm 78 years old now," he said. "My doctor tells me I have maybe 5 or 10 good years left if I'm lucky and careful, and I find myself thinking more and more about what happens to Harrison Industries after I'm gone. The board will select a new CEO from among the senior executives. That's inevitable and appropriate, but I'm also working on creating structures that will preserve the values and culture we've built here, safeguards against the company becoming just another soulless profit machine after I'm no longer around to steer it." He paused, studying Marcus with that familiar intense gaze. "I want you to sit on the Ethics and Culture Committee I'm establishing, reporting directly to the board of directors with authority to review any business decision and raise concerns if you believe we're compromising our principles for short-term gain. It's a role that will occasionally make you unpopular with other executives, but I can't think of anyone I'd trust more to be the conscience of this organization." Marcus accepted the responsibility, knowing it would indeed make his job harder and more complicated, but understanding that this was exactly why Mr. Harrison was asking him specifically, because he'd proven willing to prioritize doing what was right over doing what was easy or politically expedient. They talked for another hour about the details and structure of the committee, and when Mr. Harrison finally left, Marcus sat alone in his office, watching the city lights glitter in the darkness, and thinking about the improbable journey that had brought him here. 2 years ago he'd been a hotel worker,
drowning in medical debt and going through the motions of life without any clear sense of purpose or future, and now he was a corporate executive, with authority to shape how a major organization treated its employees and customers, all because he'd chosen to help a confused elderly man instead of looking away. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, all the lessons about character and compassion and the importance of staying true to your values, even when it cost you something. And Marcus understood now that those teachings hadn't just shaped his personal morality, but had created the foundation for whatever professional success he might achieve. The best part of his new position was the ability to help other people the way he'd been helped, to identify talented individuals stuck in dead-end situations, and create opportunities for them to grow and contribute at higher levels, to build systems that rewarded compassion and integrity, instead of just ruthless efficiency and bottom-line results. On his second anniversary at Harrison Industries, Marcus organized a company-wide initiative called the Second Chance Program, that identified hourly employees showing exceptional character and judgment, and provided them with education funding, mentorship, and pathways to management positions. The first cohort included a security guard who'd talked a suicidal person down from a building ledge, a custodian who'd organized a charitable giving campaign for co-workers facing hardship, and a receptionist who'd helped reunite a lost child with panicked parents. All people whose fundamental decency had gone recognized by traditional corporate advancement metrics. Marcus personally called each selected participant to inform them of their acceptance into the program, and hearing their shocked gratitude and disbelief reminded him of his own reaction when Mr. Harrison had first extended his job offer, that feeling that maybe the universe occasionally rewarded good people instead of just rewarding people who were skilled at gaming systems and leveraging connections. Years passed and Marcus continued to rise within Harrison Industries, eventually becoming Chief Culture Officer, with a seat at the executive table, and direct influence over strategic decisions affecting the entire organization. Mr. Harrison eventually retired from active management, though he remained chairman of the board, and he lived to see the company he'd built become recognized not just for financial performance, but for ethical leadership and employee satisfaction, regularly appearing on lists of best places to work and most admired corporations. The night of Mr. Harrison's retirement celebration, an elegant affair attended by business leaders and politicians and philanthropists, the elderly CEO pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation in a quiet corner away from the crowd. "I wanted to thank you," Mr. Harrison said, his voice carrying the tremor of advanced age but his eyes still sharp and clear, "for proving that my instincts about you were correct, for justifying the faith I placed in you when I made what everyone told me was a crazy decision to hire someone with no corporate experience for an executive track position. You've exceeded every expectation I had, and more importantly you've stayed true to the values that made me notice you in the first place." Marcus felt tears pricking his eyes, as he embraced the man who'd changed his life, this surrogate father figure, who'd taken a chance on a hotel worker with nothing but character to recommend him. "You gave me an opportunity I could never have earned on my own, Marcus. Everything I've accomplished here is because you were willing to see potential instead of just credentials, to value who I was over what I'd achieved. I'll spend the rest of my career trying to pay that forward." They talked for a while longer about Marcus's plans for the culture office, and Miss Harrison's hope that the values they'd worked to instill would survive the inevitable changes that came with new leadership. And when they finally rejoined the party, Marcus felt a bittersweet mixture of gratitude for everything that had been and hope for everything that might still come. Standing there in his tailored suit, surrounded by influential people who treated him as an equal, Marcus thought back to that night in the Grand Meridian lobby when he'd made a choice that seemed simple at the time, but had rippled out to transform his entire existence, and he understood finally that his mother had been right about character mattering more than credentials, about compassion being more valuable than calculation, about the importance of staying human even in environments that encouraged people to become machines. The story didn't end there, of course. Life rarely offered neat conclusions, but it reached a point where Marcus could look at what he'd built and feel satisfied that he'd honored his mother's memory, repaid Miss Harrison's faith, and created something meaningful that would continue affecting people's lives long after he was gone. Sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep, Marcus would return to the Grand Meridian as a guest, booking a room and walking through the familiar lobby where his life had changed, and he'd think about all the moments that had brought him to where he was, all the choices made and chances taken and kindnesses extended without expectation of reward. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers looked the same as they had years ago, but Marcus saw them differently now, not as the setting for his daily grind, but as the place where he'd discovered that doing the right thing wasn't just morally correct, but could actually be practically rewarded. That character and competence weren't opposites, but complementary traits that together created real and lasting value. And sometimes, just sometimes, Marcus would see an employee helping a guest with particular care and attention, going slightly beyond what their job required, because they recognized another human being in distress, and he'd smile knowing that the culture he'd helped create was spreading outward in ways he couldn't measure or control but could only trust would continue making the world slightly better, one interaction at a time.